Hello and welcome to another episode of the CIRS Group podcast. I'm Jacie,
And I'm Barbara.
and today we're going through how to create your CIRS action plan. So, really, this episode was inspired by the fact that a lot of people will book consultations with us to kind of get their head wrapped around all of the different things they need to do at their particular point in their CIRS journey. So we kind of wanted to talk through how you might be able to do that for yourself, the steps that we take when we have a consulting client who's looking for that kind of guidance. But before we jump in, none of this is medical or remediation advice. We're just giving you kind of the general guidelines of how we would structure an action plan for someone who's hit a roadblock or wants to know what they should do next when they have like 50 different options in front of them.
Yeah, and I'll start out with why have an action plan? This is really going to be, geared towards those of you who are diagnosed and haven't started anything yet or are have very, very strong suspicions that they have CIRS. Obviously, I think anybody throughout any point in the protocol could use an action plan and it's the type of thing you would want to continually iterate on as you move forward. But the reason that it's important to have one at the beginning, especially, is because there is so much information to absorb and learn. There's so much to do potentially, whether it's scheduling or finding a doctor or getting the lab work done, the blood work, or doing the environment testing, or is my environment like there's just so many things, the food and the cleaning and the this, that it can get very easy to get into that analysis paralysis mode where you're not sure what to do next and you don't because there's also you're dealing with brain fog if you're in the early stages of CIRS, and it's like a perfect storm of overwhelm. I can't imagine anyone not being overwhelmed when they first discover CIRS and realize that might be their situation. Just the environment piece alone, let alone all the other things that we have to do as CIRS patients. So that's, a really important reason why you might want to do kind of like have a plan. And the other reason is actually one, Jacie, I know we both experienced, but you've talked about more with your when you started your treatment, is to streamline for the financial or the symptom considerations. And that's like if you are limited on funds and you can't book an appointment with a doctor and do environment testing. You can't do both. So like which one is more important? Making those kinds of basically triaging what is causing the most damage at this moment in time and what's going to move you forward or have the biggest impact on your health, deciding which thing to do first by those metrics, and then, going from there. But I know, Jacie, you basically had to do that because you knew what paycheck you were getting, every other week or each month, and so you could kind of delay aspects of your treatment based on how much money was coming in so that you weren't going into debt, which it sucks to have to do that, but at the same time, I think it's a nice way to also dampen the overwhelm a little bit because you can only focus on one thing at a time at that point.
Yeah, and to clarify, like if I had had the means to open up another credit card at that time, I totally would have just to invest in my health and be able to like feel better so I could then make more money immediately. But just to validate that for anyone who is doing that, because that's totally what I would have done. But at the time, I was maxed out on my credit cards and my credit score was so bad I couldn't open a card if I wanted to.
Yeah. And I guess I did what you just described. I did have room on credit cards. So I was like, well, time to go back into debt. Woohoo. So it's kind of, yeah, do what is within your capability. And I guess it's a really nice example that you've shown that even if, as long as you are getting income in, which I know there are people out there who are also unable to get income at the same time because of CIRS, that's a terrible catch-22 to be in. But with Jacie, she, made do with what was coming in and paced it accordingly.
Yeah, so the there are a lot of reasons why someone might need an action plan. And if this all sounds really overwhelming to you, if you're not a planner, you're not a logistics person, this is why there's CIRS coaches. Like Jenny Johnson's been doing it since the beginning of CIRS coaching times. Barbara and I offer coaching to group members. There's also Christian Navarro Torres. There's lots of CIRS coaches. If you go to survivingmold.com, there's proficiency partners listed there. So there's a lot of resources. But if you are at that stage of like wanting to figure it out for yourself, if you're just curious if you would be able to create an action plan for yourself, or even if you don't have the financial means to hire a coach right now, these are kind of what these are the steps I take whenever someone presents to me. They're basically they book me for consult, and then this is the process we go through. And it was so hard to come up with these steps because everyone's CIRS journey is so unique and so like specific to you, so nuanced, both in terms of like your symptoms, your experiences, what you can tolerate, what your environment is like. It's just so nuanced. So these are very generic steps, but I did kind of think about the commonalities between everyone who's come to me and how I kind of organize the information they're presenting me with.
Beautiful. Yeah, I'm excited to dig into it.
So the first thing I do whenever someone comes to me for a consult, and kind of what you want to do when you're looking at your own CIRS action plan, is to establish the context and goals of the plan. So typically, if people are booking a meeting, it means there's something they're trying to solve for. So kind of try and identify those things you're trying to solve for. And there's generally three parts to this part of the conversation. So the first part being where you have been. So it's more of like your health and environment history, where you can kind of download, like, historically, I've had major issues with headaches since I was a child. I've had ADHD-like symptoms. I know I grew up in a moldy basement. I was working in a moldy bar, like your Barbara, for a period of time in your 20s. Like, just downloading all of that, that where you have been. And then you kind of want to define where you are. So that would be kind of, your current environmental situation. If you know the scores in the different buildings you're in, so that would be like your home and your workplace, the places you're at most frequently. It might also be where you are symptom-wise, supplement-wise, what you're currently taking. If you're working with any other practitioners on, you know, CIRS adjacent things like an autoimmune illness or GI issues or anything like that. And then the third part is where you want to be. So this is really the goal of the meeting if you're booking a session, or the goal of creating this action plan altogether. It's really looking at what you want this action plan to achieve for yourself. So to make this more concrete, I can give myself as an example. So when I was first diagnosed with CIRS, I was coming into it with this diagnosis of ankylosing spondylitis, but following that, I had, the symptom cluster, very hallmark CIRS symptoms, brain fog, fatigue, static shocks, all of that stuff. At the time, I was really immobile. It was really difficult for me to move around, and that was really frustrating to me. So when I was looking at, my action plan and what I would have wanted to achieve in those first couple months of treating CIRS, it was really to like get the ball rolling, get on binders, find a good environment, and then move whatever levers that I could to be in less pain. And how I would prioritize those three things really goes into step two, which is, talking about where you're at in the protocol and what your biggest levers are going to be.
Yeah. And where you're at in the protocol, for some of you, if you haven't done anything yet, and I mean, chances are most of the people who book appointments with CIRS coaches have done something at that point. But if you're listening to this, maybe you have done nothing at this point. So you're going to be at like ground zero, I guess, of CIRS. And so you do have a lot of options from that point forward. Do you try to find a way to get some blood work done? Maybe you go to your regular doctor and ask for CIRS related blood work. Or maybe you just go ahead and find a CIRS doctor that other people seem to recommend, and you just make an appointment and then see what happens there. Maybe you're still in that discovery mode. You're a little bit worried about where you currently live, and you decide to just do the environment testing where you're living right now to assess the current situation. So, again, it's fully this part of the plan, where you're at in the protocol, will inform everything. And I think for each person, again, we're trying to generalize it so it's as helpful to people as possible, but it is so very specific to each individual because someone who's living in a relatively clean environment, but is working in a really not clean environment, your first priority might be to talk to your boss. That might be the first step. Maybe there's a way for you to work from home, or maybe there's a way for you to change your position with the company so you can work from home or something to that effect. Or maybe it's even looking for a different job. So that's where I think it does really help to have a coach or even a friend. Again, if you don't have the funds to hire a coach, maybe you can have a friend, CIRS patient preferably, but if not, just somebody to kind of walk you through what the issues could be or what the next steps could be, and then decide which of those next steps make the most sense for you. And another example would be to, if you are in exposure, but you're also having, let's say, gut issues, methylation issues, like there's a lot of like symptoms bubbling up, chances are like 9.9 times out of 10, if one of those things that you're dealing with is I'm still in exposure, chances are you want to tackle the exposure part first, whatever that means. And if you're renting, maybe that's trying to break that lease. Maybe it's testing because you haven't even tested yet, but you think you're in exposure. It's troubleshooting that situation first and foremost, because chances are, if you get out of exposure, some of that other stuff, like I know for me, GI issues, things like that, kind of settled down. They didn't go away, but they settled down a little bit once I got myself out of exposure. And then beyond that, once you are in a safe place, then maybe it's the time to look at adding supports to work on your methylation or your GI so that you can continue to feel as good as you can while you wait for the protocol to work its magic.
Yeah, and one really frustrating thing I think for a lot of people is sometimes the most effective next step for them wasn't why they booked the consultation, or it isn't to them the thing they want to work on the most. And I'm just gonna I'm just gonna call people out here. And I fully relate to this and understand this because this was part of my surge journey too, is just this weight gain that I couldn't stop. And it felt so important to me to address that because I didn't feel like myself. I didn't feel like I had control of my body because I was gaining all this weight, even though I was quote unquote doing everything right. And so, if you had asked me at the beginning of my CIRS journey what my goal in a meeting like this might have been, it would have been to figure out the weight issues that I was experiencing with CIRS. However, I was still in exposure. So if I were me coming to me for a consultation, I would have that tough conversation and be like, I know you want to address the weight gain, but sometimes the most efficient way to get to that end goal of having better body composition with CIRS is to tackle the environment first, because otherwise it's like you're swimming upstream the entire time you're trying to lose that weight because your body is still experiencing at a root cause level the things that are making it gain weight in the first place. So when I'm faced with this in a consultation, because I want to validate and honor that person's desires as well as, the reality of their situation being they need to address, whatever step of the protocol before they can get to that end goal. I still like to discuss with them what should be done next. So looking at the environment is generally for most people, that's the hardest thing to overcome. And it's really about explaining to them that this is the most efficient way to get to that end goal that you have. However, I do also like to see if there's a middle step they can take in the meantime, like some sort of support or, movement in the direction that they want to go in terms of the weight loss. And then if they are truly just stuck, I like to make recommendations for testing or to work with a specialist in that area. So, for example, if you are dealing with weight gain that just feels uncontrollable with CIRS and you just feel stuck in that space and nothing is really moving the needle for you, one thing you could do is a Genie test, which tests your genetic expression in response to the inflammation, and it might show that you're hypometabolic. So if you were and you've been doing carnivore and still gaining weight, and you're like, how is this even possible? It could be because you're hypometabolic, and so adding some carbs in will actually make the weight loss a little bit easier. So if you're really truly stuck on that one thing you really want to address, it could be really helpful just to get more information.
Yeah. So I would say at this point, I hope that if you're watching this, you feel a little bit more empowered as to how you can create your own action plan. Again, we're around if you need some help, and lots of proficiency partners are around to help you out as well. And of course, we'll link to some resources in the description box if you want to pursue that. But what you guys might want to consider first and foremost is to sit down with a piece of paper or a document online if you prefer typing to do create a prioritized list of what to do next. What are your goals? What do you know you need to do in any order? Just kind of brain dump all the things that you think you need to do. Put that down. Figure out which thing might be the most pressing, hint, likely exposure related. So if it has to do with moving or not working at your office anymore or changing jobs, it's probably going to be somewhere in that category for most people. But maybe your first thing is looking for a doctor. And then that's when you can start to think, okay, what resources do I need to accomplish that particular goal? And there some resources, of course, will always recommend joining us over at the cirsgroup.com. It's a whole community of people in exactly your situation or similar situation who've either there might be a little further along or maybe a little bit further behind, but everybody's gathering information and sharing it with each other. That is a great place to get more resources on, for example, how did you find a safe place to live? Jacie, who just did a class all about that, in fact, which is available for members to watch. But you can ask any of those kinds of questions. What doctor are you guys using? And do you have a good experience? I have this, this, and this as my main symptoms. Is this a good doctor to pursue for that? You can ask questions like that in a group setting. And then of course from there, once you have an idea of your most urgent goals and how to accomplish them, you can then create that plan to move forward on those and obviously pivot as needed when you get new information or something comes up.
And there will be pivots.
There always
It's very
always pivot.
disappointing to me as someone who likes to plan like 50 years down the line. And then like a pivot comes up and I'm like, you've ruined the next 49 years of my life.
Oh
So just
no.
have that expectation for yourself. You will probably have to pivot along the way and just be open to that.
Yeah. And again, also know yourself. Some people really are going to feel very comfortable listening to this episode and creating their own plan and moving forward. There are other people who are going to watch or listen to this episode and think, "Oh my God, now I feel even more out in the deep end. I really need some help." Please look at the people who offer this kind of coaching. It might not be as pricey as you think it is. Well, I try to put down as big of a range of options as we possibly can in the notes, but ask for help. And again, the most financially easy option would be to join one of these online communities. It doesn't have to be ours, but that will get put you in touch with other CIRS patients. And sometimes that like crowdsourcing that kind of help is really beneficial and also just helps you cut corners, helps you learn from other people's mistakes so that you're not making the same ones and costing you money or time or energy. So all of those are options. You know yourself best, so do what works best for you and keep moving forward. Any little bit that you can move forward is obviously going to be towards the goal of getting better, getting healthy, and leaving a lot of this chronic illness BS behind you.
Hmm. Yeah, so as always, if you are looking for more resources and support, you can join us over at thesarsgroup.com.
We'll see you there.